On August 29th, 1992, in front of a capacity crowd at London's Wembley Stadium, the British Bulldog Davy Boy Smith and Bret Hitman Hart entered into an absolute technical masterpiece for the Intercontinental Championship. It's the match that made me a wrestling fan. It's the match that hooked me on the storytelling art form of professional wrestling. And 30 plus years later, really it's the reason that I'm still doing what I do today. That was the match that made me a fan. However, all these years later, it is a match that is steeped in controversy, and as recently as just last week, Diana Hart and Bret Hart have been engaging in a war of words over SummerSlam 1992 and what really went down. I'm Ben, this is Ben Veal Talks, and today I want to talk a bit about what Bret said, what Diana has said, and also about what comes next. So the reason I'm recording this video is I've just recorded a 2-hour interview with Diana Hart, talking about these claims, talking about why she made these statements now, and talking about her true feelings about the match, about Davey Boy Smith's legacy, and about Bret. That video will air in full tomorrow on the Wrestling Life Online YouTube channel. It's unedited, it's raw, it's vulnerable. I have purposefully hung back because I want Diana to tell her side of the story. Now, I felt very torn having this conversation because, as anyone who has ever watched any of my content knows, I am a Bret Hart guy. Bret Hitman Hart was my role model growing up as a kid. Bret Hitman Hart, in my opinion, is genuinely the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be when it comes to the art form of professional wrestling. Bret Hitman Hart meant the world to me during my childhood, and his incredible body of work lives on to this day. You can see behind me how much SummerSlam 1992 means to me. I've got the Intercontinental Championship, I've got a signed poster over here, I've got the VHS there. It is my favourite pay-per-view of all time, and that match is my favourite match of all time. But also, I do believe there are two sides to every single story, and when the claims came out from Diana, I wanted to have that conversation with her and ask her what prompted her to make such strong statements. So I want to backtrack a bit. The reason that Diana has come out now is because very recently at Hitman's Bar, Bret Hart's own bar in Calgary, there was a screening of SummerSlam 1992, a detailed screening with Bret in attendance where he broke down the match frame by frame, move by move, and talked about the match. That is what has made this current. But the other thing that has made this current is that Bret's autobiography Hitman, which came back out all the way in 2008, an absolutely tremendous book, possibly the best wrestling memoir of all time, has recently become available as an audiobook narrated by Bret, which has opened that book up to a whole new audience. And of course, that's opened some of his controversial comments up to a whole new audience. So I want to start there. I want to start with doing a backtrack into the book and some of the things Bret said specifically about SummerSlam 1992. So I've got the book here. It is covered in post-it notes. I have read this book from cover to cover countless times. And I want to just start. I've highlighted a few of the sections in terms of Bret talking about SummerSlam 1992. So he's talking about the run-up to SummerSlam 1992, and he's talking about what was originally planned was to be Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental title, with SummerSlam taking place in Washington. Soon the decision is made that it's going to be in Wembley Stadium, and that the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith will be the hometown opponent. And Bret says, as part of my training regimen leading up to SummerSlam, I cut back on drinking and late nights. Davey, however, had no trouble throwing them back. So we were all surprised the next morning when he was suddenly in severe agony. He'd injured his knee during his match the night before, but the handful of Demerol he'd taken afterwards had numbed him enough to convince him he was okay. Then in the wee hours of the morning, the drug wore off. Davey was rushed home to where he and Diana were living in Florida and ended up being off the rest of the summer, which made me worry about our upcoming match and about him. Bret goes on to say that as the summer slipped by, I spent time training and working on another big cartoon drawn of all the wrestlers, this time for Vince. I couldn't help but feel indebted to him. I constantly phoned Davey down in Florida, but all Diana could tell me was that he was out with Jim Neidhart somewhere. I finally tracked Jim down just hours before I was leaving for England and was shocked when he told me that he'd just taken Davey and Diana to the airport. Davy was high as a kite when he caught his flight, Jim said, because he'd been up all night smoking crack with him. Jim told me that Davy had a gorilla on his back and he was worried about him. I wish Jim would take a good look at himself. I couldn't have been more disappointed in Davy, Bret says. I feared he would end up making us both look bad. I remember Vince asking me back in Binghamton if I was sure I could go on last in the main event. I can promise you nobody will be able to follow us, I'd said. So Bret goes on to talking about arriving in London. This is just days before SummerSlam takes place. Hundreds of fans poured out of the hotel lobby to chant my name in the streets. I set out to find Davy, but he was off somewhere with Diana and his family. I didn't see him until the required entrance rehearsal at Wembley Stadium the night before the show. When I asked him why he hadn't returned my calls all summer, he wasn't able to look me in the eye. He fessed up that he'd been smoking crack with Jim for weeks and was now terrified. He'd gone back to being the same helpless kid I'd rescued from Dynamite 10 years earlier. So I'm going to fast track and paraphrase. There's a lot of description here about the match and what's involved in the SummerSlam 1992 match. I'm going to paraphrase and jump ahead now to halfway through the match. Back in the ring, Joey Morella, referee for a match, gave Davey and me the rules. The three of us momentarily awestruck by the size of the crowd. We pushed off with Davey looking strong and serious. The crowd was ours and the bell sounded. At first, Davey outmaneuvered me with simple and realistic wrestling, but after a few minutes he was breathing hard. Bret, I'm fooked, Davey panted as I had clamped in a side headlock. I can't remember anything. Davey, just listen to me. I'll carry you. So Bret describes this as the test of his career. He says, that's how it was, me calling every single high spot for Davey, sometimes even with the necessary facial expressions helping him conserve what little stamina he had for a comeback, but was still more than 50 minutes away. Every time Davey picked me up, I went up like a feather. He went up for me like a full refrigerator. Bret goes on to say, as he describes the match, I'd carried Davey as far as possible, and now he took over for his long-awaited comeback. I called out all my big moves for him, and after I'd taken them all, Davey dragged me to my feet by my singlet straps, revived enough to signal with his hands that it was time for me to finish me off with his running power slam. Always incredibly strong, Davey easily twirled me over his shoulder and charged across the ring, flattening me to the mat for the 1-2. But this time it was me who astounded the crowd by barely kicking out. Clutching his face, a tearful Davey only half feigned amazement as he finally realised that I'd put together a masterpiece. We get to the end of the match, and of course that very famous roll-up, the incredible crowd reaction, one of the greatest pops in wrestling history. Bret talks about what came afterwards. Afterwards, I made out I was too pissed to shake Davey's hand. I'd planned all of this with Davey, but it became painfully obvious to me that he'd forgotten all about it. I desperately tried to make eye contact, but he was oblivious as Diana climbed into the ring, crying. I can only assume for real. I'm thinking, come on, Davey, look at me and we'll make them all cry. But Davey never caught on. Instead, he was trying to milk the crowd. I was thinking, the drama is with me, not them, for fuck's sake. Please look at me, Davey. After too many attempts, I gave up and just walked over and shook his hand. He completely missed one of the tiny moments that can make it all more real. But what could I do? The torch had been passed. And Bret wraps up by saying, I've always believed this was my greatest match, especially because I'd carried Davey all the way through it without anyone being the wiser. My dad would tell me later that it's one thing to have a great match, but it's another thing to have a great match in front of 80,000 people. So that's always been Bret's perspective. I remember reading it at the time, and whilst I absolutely adored that book, and nothing can shake my unwavering kind of fandom, I think, for Bret Hitman Hart and his body of work, I've always kind of come away from that description feeling quite uncomfortable about that, because that match is a masterpiece, and as incredible as you might be as a master technician, and Bret undoubtedly was, I found it hard in my head to kind of fathom the idea that one person could be completely out of it and another person could fully carry them to such a level as to pull on that masterpiece. I also never really picked up on the nuances of the last moments in the ring. Like, I can kind of see it through the perspective of what's described here, but also as a fan, those last moments of Bret and Bulldog having a hug, the fireworks going off, like, that was so iconic for me as a fan, and it's hard to see it through the eyes of potentially a missed opportunity or missed emotion. But that's what Bret said, and this was all the way back in 2008, a long, long time ago, and a lot has passed since then. Since then, SummerSlam 1992 has been crowned by WWE the greatest SummerSlam match of all time. Bret has become a 3-time WWE Hall of Famer in the years that have passed. His place is indelibly etched in WWE history, as is the British Bulldogs, now also a WWE Hall of Famer. So it does beg the question, why would you critique something which is so universally loved? Well, I now want to read to you what Diana has said on her social media post and what's kind of brought this up to date again. So this is a post that went out just before WrestleMania weekend, so not everyone saw it, but she posted a picture which caught my eye of SummerSlam 92, Bret, Diana, and Bulldog in the ring with a big black cross through Bret's face, or his entire body, in fact. This is what she said. So these are the words of Diana. Bret does not present his statements as opinions, he states them as facts. That distinction matters because many of his claims, specifically about Davy's physical or mental state at SummerSlam 1992, are simply not true. It's my opinion that Bret's current misrepresentation of events at SummerSlam 1992 may be influenced by the stroke he suffered in the summer of 2002. What cannot be ignored is the timing, that Davy died prior to that in May 2002. There was a full decade when Bret could have raised his claims directly with Davy if they were legitimate, but he never did. Not once. The absurd and hurtful accusations began after Davy was no longer alive to respond. Instead, Bret now frames over and over, despite my appeals to him with facts, proof records, and critical reasoning, to please restrain and refrain his slander, but he refuses. Bret now cites this incredible match as great solely because of his own alleged brilliance, assigning himself all credit while diminishing Davy's invaluable role. Bret's narrative is not supported by history, by documentation, or by what audiences can plainly see when they watch the match itself, without Bret's overlapping slandering words. Davy's performance shows no evidence of impairment. On the contrary, it reflects Davy's professionalism, strength, and focus, despite the fact that he was recovering from necrotizing fasciitis, I think that's how you say it, a serious and life-threatening flesh-eating infection. We have proof. Davy did not complain, seek sympathy, or disclose his condition to the public. He simply did the work. It is difficult to reconcile these facts with Bret's retroactive claims, except to note a long-standing pattern of self-aggrandizement. In my opinion, I'm very clear that this is opinion. Bret's tendency toward ego, bullying, and exaggeration predates both his stroke and the match in question. I base that on my lived experience growing up with him as my older brother and on decades of observed behaviour towards family members and colleagues. What I will not accept is history being rewritten after the fact, especially when the person, Davy, being totally discredited is no longer alive to defend himself. Davy was so good and loyal to Bret. So those are very, very strong words from Diana, but they're not the only post. There was later another post where Diana shared proof of the disease that Davy was suffering with. So Davy had the flesh-eating disease, Bret chalking it up to something like a little pimple, as he casually referred to it at his recent live public presentation at his bar. I was a guest with my boyfriend, sat at the very front table where we could see within a few feet Bret perched on his stool, having his little associate rewind and stop and rewind and stop, the entire match being shown on all the TVs in his bar. After he pointed out, but it's his opinion, not facts, how he felt Davy looked stupid or out of it, or how Davy messed this up or did it wrong. A fact, though, if we want to tear apart that phenomenal match of which Davy was half of and gave his 100% best efforts as a wrestler, 100% committed to doing right and best in front of his family and friends and wrestling peers, it was Bret, the excellence of execution, who got Davy's feet mixed up on his patented sharpshooter submission finishing hold. I thought this slip-up by Bret was part of the beauty of the improvisation of wrestling, the old Stampede wrestling style where you just go out and do it, no scripts, no rehearsing, just raw wrestling by two great athletes who loved having that opportunity. Until listening to Bret, I did not know Bret was not able to just go out and wrestle as he had done, as Bret always did, as Owen Dynamite, Brian Pillman, Antonio Inoki, Giant Baba, Terry Funk, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, Hawk Animal, Flair, Crawford, the Malenkos, etc., without needing a 20-plus minute match, without needing to telephone opponents and work out move by move a 20-plus minute match. Gosh, Davey would go 60 minutes in Calgary against some of the Japanese boys who didn't speak English for Stampede shows. Dynamite vs Tiger Mask is another example of just going out and telling an incredible story. Davey wrestling Owen in Berlin after several matches that night due to it being a tournament. They didn't need to go over anything. Pre-SummerSlam 1992, Davey was suffering from necrotizing fasciitis, flesh-eating disease, and he still gave that match as good as anyone could have given. For Bret to say this past Saturday would have been even better if he had not been on drugs. What a jerk. And Davey was so good to Bret. Now, as if that wasn't enough, there's even more from Diana. This came on social media last week. Fact, Davey had x-rays taken of his left knee at Merseyside Hospital in Portend, ME, upon Vince McMahon's insistence, as Davey literally crawled into the TV tapings in Maine with a high fever, an extremely swollen left knee and leg, and he did not look well. Davey was scheduled to wrestle the Repo Man that night. Davey continued to feel worse after coming back to the tapings after the x-rays. Vince insisted Davey go home and get better. I was in Calgary filming interviews for SummerSlam 1992 with my mum, dad and brother Bruce. Davey phoned me to say he was going home and Ellie and Jim were picking him up at the airport. The next day Davey phoned saying he was not getting better but told me to finish my Calgary interviews and we'd talk again the next day, but he didn't feel like talking. He just wanted to sleep. Within a few days Ellie called me saying Davey was not getting better and she felt we should all fly back to our Florida home. Harry, George and I flew home that weekend and took Davey to see a doctor whom our chiropractor and friend Dr. Doug Price recommended. These are facts, not opinions. And the final post from Diana before we get on to the interview. So Diana said, fact, Davey was in Goulburn, England with our family to visit and be with his family there. His mum and dad were very helpful and comforting to all of us as Davey continued recuperating from his infection and prepare for SummerSlam 1992. They were very worried about Davey's knee. Bret did not ever phone Davey's parents home regarding talks with Davey about the upcoming match with him. Bret definitely had their phone number as Davey's mum and dad graciously let Bret and Judy stay with them for weeks in 1981. They kept the same number right until their home in Goulburn sold about 5 years ago. Opinion, Bret claims Davey could barely get on the plane to fly to Wembley Stadium, not home to Goulburn the day of the match. Fact, Jim Neidhart said it was hard to get Davey in the plane. Yes, he said that about when we all flew to Manchester in mid-August 1992, which was about 2 weeks prior to the event, and which he was referring to was his concerns about the infection in Davey's left knee and how it would react to the air pressure during flying. Fact, Davey was clearly in his hometown area of Goulburn in the days leading up to SummerSlam 1992. Davey was so proud to be a part of that event and main eventing it with Bret. There is absolutely no way he would have done anything to jeopardise it. Had he not been so ill, he would have been able to train for it and not be literally on his couch or bed for weeks leading up to it. Davey was so proud of how that match went. For Bret to claim that Davey was doing drugs at that time with Bret or anyone in my family is such a slap in the face to all of us who truly cared about Davey and were praying he'd be all the phenomenal asset as was Bret to that amazing match. And Bret never said any of this until after Davey was dead and after his stroke. Confabulation. But Davey doesn't need to be collateral damage from Bret's stroke. Seems like Davey's become a victim of a stroke victim. Davey never liked being a victim. He was so tough and such a good guy. Most of all the wrestlers loved him. So a lot to get through there, a lot to digest. The best way to do this really is to hear directly from one of these two individuals. So coming tomorrow, there's 2 hours with Diana Hart where I hang back, I ask for questions, but really I let her tell her side of the story. There are two perspectives to every single situation. Diana was there watching ringside and very much embroiled and part of that SummerSlam 1992 match. Her perspective is valid and her perspective needs to be heard. Now, I really want to hear what you all think once you've watched the interview and what you think to these comments today, and also what you think to this being brought up so long after the fact. You know, why is an all-time classic being really critiqued by those involved? Why not just let it lie? Because, quite frankly, that match is beloved by so many people, and I don't want to be here critiquing a match that I absolutely adore. The conversation with Diana gets very, very vulnerable. Diana opens up like I've never heard her speak before in an interview about some of the challenges she's faced, about being part of the Hart family, about being married to Davey, about her book that came out and her regrets about that book. She talks very much about Davey's legacy, talks about the impact that all of this has had on her children. It's a very open conversation, and as I said at the outset, I have hung back because I will always be a huge fan. As a fan, I'll always be a huge fan of Bret Hitman Hart and Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog. The very first person that I inducted into the Wrestling Life Hall of Fame last year, when the Hall of Fame launched in 2025, was the British Bulldog. There was only one choice for me as the first inductee, for everything that he brought to professional wrestling, to everything he gave us as British fans, and to how he opened up the business to this huge European fan base. SummerSlam 1992 will always remain special to me, and it will always be an all-time classic. And no matter what the story is involved in the match taking place itself, and what is fact and what is fiction, you'll never convince me that it isn't one of, if not the greatest professional wrestling match of all time, with the all-time most fantastic crowd reaction at the end of it. I say at the end of the interview to Diana, what's your relationship like with Bret? Is it beyond repair now, or is there still a chance of the two of you kind of coming back together and mending these bridges that are between you? I talked to Diana specifically about all of these claims, about every aspect of that match. We also talk about Davey's rivalry with Shawn Michaels, what should have happened at one night only, Davey Boy's defection to WCW following a Montreal Screwjob, and whether that was a mistake. There's a lot of ground covered, and I wanted, before the interview comes out, just to put everything down in one clear video in terms of what Bret has said in the past and what Diana has said now. The event at the Hitman's Bar that took place on April the 11th wasn't filmed. There doesn't seem to be documentary evidence of it online. So this is very much those that were in the room, including Diana, reacting to what was said on that intimate night in the bar. Why that took place in April and not on the anniversary of August, no one knows. Diana doesn't know. I don't know. Seems really, really odd timing to be breaking down SummerSlam 1992 and not one of Bret's many WrestleMania classics, like WrestleMania 10 versus Owen, or WrestleMania 8 versus Piper, or WrestleMania 12 against Shawn, or WrestleMania 13 against Austin. Like, there are so many options that could have happened that would have played into WrestleMania weekend. So I don't know why now, and I don't know why this is being dredged up again, but I wanted to bring you the interview as soon as I could. Diana and I were supposed to be speaking anyway. We had an interview in the diary until all of these things happened on social media, which changed the whole trajectory of our interview and the conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. That'll be on Wrestling Life Online tomorrow afternoon. I'd love to hear what you think, and I'd love to hear what you think specifically to the claims made by both Bret and Diana, and what your take is on this whole situation and on that match at SummerSlam 1992. As always, I'm Ben. This is Ben Veal Talks. I'm the host of Wrestling Life, a podcast which goes out each and every week, interviews with talents from the wrestling business, both past and present. And I look forward to sharing that interview with you tomorrow and speaking with you all again very, very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.